Medicaid and how to qualify for Medicaid. Now, what the information I'm giving you today is, I realize, somewhat general, because it's tough to get specific with everybody's particular situation, but I'm trying to at least educate everybody on some of the possibilities that exist. And each of them can be tailored to everybody's needs. Now, the last thing, because I really don't want to hide anything, is, well, what does all that cost? That is more expensive than the wills we talked about. To have a will, the health care, the power of attorney, all those documents, and also protect my house by having a trust, having my house transferred, a new deed has to be made, transferring my house into the trust, that is approximately $2,500 to do something like that. And again, I don't know if any of you are familiar, that fee is extremely reasonable. So that about concludes my remarks on what I said. Hopefully, I've given you some information to think about for yourselves or others that you may know that need this information. And fire away if you have any questions.
Yeah, can you put your house in a trust if you still have a mortgage on it?
Yes. If you have a mortgage, you can still transfer your house in a trust. You still owe the mortgage. The bank doesn't care as long as you're still getting paid on the mortgage payments. If you have a reverse mortgage, the same thing applies. Okay? You can do the same. Okay? Your mortgage is still there. It's still going to be a lien. Again, and then if you decided you wanted to sell your house and you put it in a trust, you can still sell it, but like anything else, the mortgage would first have to be paid off. Yeah, you had a question?
No,
Oh, okay.
that was just a follow-up, but you already followed up on this question.
Right, right. So, so it's kind of a no-brainer for most people to at least protect your house by putting your house in a trust. You still have control, you're not losing control of your house. Now, the other question comes about, well, my house is one of my assets, but I have other assets, what do I do with those? When I say other assets, meaning I have money in the bank, I have stocks, whatever. All of what I said about the house applies to that as well. You could take, let's assume you have a house, and you also have a stock portfolio. Well, that stock portfolio could also be transferred into a trust as well. Now, not the disadvantage, but keep in mind, once you do that, you no longer have complete control over that money, which means that even though it's in a trust, you say, okay, I want to sell some stock and I want to spend my money on something else. It's not up to you to then say, okay, I sold my stock for $10,000, my son's the trustee, give me $10,000. He can't give you the $10,000 because you've put it in a trust and you've said in the trust, when I die, who's going to get the money? However, there are always within a trust of still utilizing some of the income from that portfolio by certain language in a trust, which could say that even though I'm putting this in, I still have the right to get all the dividends, the interest, whatever it might be. So all of these trusts can be tailor-made to however your particular needs are. So, yep.
At what point in the lifespan is it appropriate to start doing this?
There really is no age. I have people that are in their mid-50s that have done it, and obviously later. But I would say, unless someone has a serious health issue, okay, that probably 60 is when people will generally start doing. And I'm talking about the trust now. I'm not talking
Right.
about the basic needs that everybody should have of a power of attorney and the will.
Right.
In terms of the trust and protecting their assets, I would say then. And the reason why I say not too early is because most people that are younger, you don't want to be tied down by a trust. You may sell your house, you want to buy another house, you may want to move here, you want to move there. But for most people, when they're in their 60s, they're pretty much going to stay where they are. They might sell their house maybe to go to Florida or something like that. So that would be my recommendation.
I was just wondering, if someone is getting up in age and they're living at home and they want to transfer their house into their kid's name to take care of it, and that person's going to stay in the house, but then that person gets worse as time goes on and maybe they got to go to a nursing home, are they going to be charged at the nursing home because they own a house, or that they already, any bills that run up in a nursing home, are they going to say, well, I don't own a house
Let me
now?
answer your question. First of all, to answer your question, if you took your house, you transferred one of your kids' name, and now the kid has to go into a nursing home, whatever, The answer is unfortunately yes, they would have the right to file a lien against that house because the kid owns it. Now, that brings me back to something else. Sometimes people have come to me and said, you know what, I protected my house, I put it all in my kid's name. That is the absolute worst thing to do. Never, ever, ever put your house in your children's name. There are many reasons. Let me give you some examples. I had a man that came in, he wanted his house in his daughter's name. We did it, and he had a life estate in the deed, which meant that even though it was his name, she couldn't throw him out, he had the right to live there. Little known to him, she had credit card debt beyond belief. She was being sued left and right, and the windup was that all of these people suing her now, since she owned the house, had a judgment, which is now a lien against his house. So he transferred his house to his child. The child ran up all sorts of debt, and now his house that he lives in has judgments against it of, many, many dollars. So it is never a good idea to put it directly in your children's name for that reason. There's no protection. When you put it in a trust, even though one of your children may be the trustee, it doesn't matter what their financial condition is. If one of your children is running up debts left and right, they can't file a lien against the trust because your child doesn't own the trust, the property. You don't own the property. It's owned by the, quote, trust. So it also protects your house from creditors, your creditors, as well as the creditors of your children. Sometimes people also think, well, if I just add my daughter's name or my son's name on the deed, somehow I protected it. It doesn't. If you have your name on any asset, Medicaid says we don't care that your daughter's name's on it and your name, you own it all as far as we're concerned. So it's never a good idea to put children's names on your houses or any other property. The best way of protecting it is putting it in a trust. That way you know that they don't have control over it, you still have control, and they're only going to receive it when you're gone. So, that answer your question, Tim?
Yeah.
But, if you have income though, it doesn't matter what you do with the house, say you,
Okay, we'll get to the income, okay? Now, let's assume you transferred your house, and now you have to get Medicaid. And Medicaid, let's assume for the sake of argument, says you're only allowed, husband and wife, say $1,500 a month, and your income, your pension is more than $1,500 a month, is $2,000 a month. The extra money, rather than Medicaid getting it, there's a way of putting the extra money into something called a pooled trust, where the money goes into a trust, and you're allowed to draw that money out, the extra money you've put in, let's assume there's an extra $1,000 a month, and use that money to pay your bills. I transfer my house, but I still have to pay the cable bill, the telephone, and everything else. So rather than Medicaid getting it, I could still use that money for these extra items. Okay, that's the way it works with that. Now, the other question sometimes people ask, what about IRAs and pension plans? If you have an IRA or a pension plan, that's exempt from Medicaid. But if you're receiving payments under a pension or an IRA, well, that's considered income. And if it exceeds the amount, rather than Medicaid getting it, if you deposit that in something called a pooled trust, and that's a trust, special trust run by the government, which allows you to deposit the extra money into it, and then withdraw on it monthly or however you need it to use, that's permitted as well. And usually, it's not a matter of making up bills. Most of the time, the extra money is probably what you do need to run your house. You're still gonna have to pay your utilities, your real estate taxes, all of the normal living expenses, food, clothing. So that's how the extra income problem is circumvented. So,
That was the question I had.
yeah. I tried to keep it general, but, we get into specifics. So if you have any other specifics, let me know, I'll be glad to. Yeah,
If I put my house in a trust,
yeah,
now I have a pension, I get the social security.
right.
So I wind up in a nursing home. Well, they'll get my pension and the social security. The nursing home, right?
No, your pension and you're talking about if you wind up in a nursing home,
Right.
then they will. You're only allowed to keep, that's right.
They can have it.
Yeah, that's
Do it.
right. There is
As
no
long as
way
they don't get
around
the
it
house, I
because
don't get.
the example I gave you before is what's called a pooled trust,
Right.
because you're still living in the house and you have expenses, but technically you're in a nursing home, you don't really have any expenses. Now, another thing is sometimes people say they didn't make any plans at all, and now all of a sudden, the husband or the wife has to go into a nursing home, and they haven't done anything. Is there a way around that in saving money? And the answer is yes, there is a way. And one of the ways around that is this 5-year look back that I mentioned to you. One of the exceptions is transfers between a husband and a wife. So if the husband has to go into a nursing home and the wife has a power of attorney, she could take all of his property and transfer it to herself in her name. So now, there's no 5-year look backs between husbands and wives. That will enable her to protect whatever property they have. But of course, the problem now is everything is now in her name. And if anything happens to her, it's going to go. Now, she could do the same thing, but then we start a whole new 5-year look back for her. And generally, when this happens, you know, they're usually close in age, the husband and wife. But there are ways, even aside from that, if someone has to go into a nursing home, of still saving a lot of their property. When I say a lot, I don't want to go through how it's done, but you might still be able to save almost half of all your property. I'm talking about the person has to go into a nursing home tomorrow and nothing's been done. So there are still ways around that. It's kind of technical and I'm not going to go through that right now. But I think the most important thing is, as a minimum, for people that protect your house. Forget many times, and it's totally understandable, you don't want to give up control of your bank accounts, your stocks, or everything else. But if you live in your house, and you know, realistically, I don't intend to move anywhere, okay? There's no harm in transferring it into a trust. You still have a life estate, you still have control. Even though your children are named as beneficiaries, you've got the right to change that. The trustee is usually one of your children. So if you tell your trustee, if you want to sell the house, I want to sell my house, now, you're going to have to sign since you still have ownership, so will the trustee. People say, well, what happens if my son says, and I had this happen, he didn't want to sign it because the father wanted to move somewhere else, and the remedy was simple. We're changing the beneficiary of the trust, so you're no longer the trustee, we got a new beneficiary, so you get nothing. Keep in mind, even though you can't take it back, you could change who the trustee is. And that's exactly what this man did. It's a real story. They didn't want him to sell the house, and they didn't want him moving somewhere else, and that's what he did. I'll never forget it. His son then says, no, it's okay. The father's a real old says, no, it's over. And that was it.
Oh, wow.
So you still have control. It's not that you're giving everything up. You still have control. So that's kind of a no-brainer. The other area, when you talk about putting your stocks, bonds, and cash into a trust, then it gets a little trickier. And I usually advise people not to do that initially. You can always, as things develop, handle that when you get closer to having a problem. But that's why the business of power of attorney, durable power of attorneys, plays into this. Because if you haven't made plans, and all of a sudden you have a stroke and you can't even sign your name, no one could do any of this. They need someone who's authorized legally to sign your name. So that's why the durable power of attorney. And the question is, why do they call it durable? Sometimes I'm asked that. Originally, powers of attorney did exactly what I said. But if you became legally incompetent, you had a stroke, well, then the power of attorney was no good anymore. So they changed the law and they said from now on, you could have a power of attorney that's durable, meaning as long as you're alive, the power is good forever. So that's why the term durable power of attorney comes in. Anything else? Yeah.
Just with regard to the $1,500 threshold for Medicare, do they differentiate between, say, a normal pension and a disability pension? Or is it all
No, they
just?
don't care whatever income you
Okay,
have.
okay.
They don't care whether it's from Social Security or private pension. It makes no difference. No, they don't differentiate that. Now, there are other ways besides this pooled trust of preserving the extra income that we talked about, but it's kind of technical and there'd be no point. I'd be glad to discuss it. There's other ways of keeping that extra income. All right, anything else? Well, listen, after we finish, any questions that come to mind to anyone, if you want to call me up, you all have my card. If you want to come in, there's no charge. I'll be glad to sit down with you and discuss whatever it is. And, or if you want to discuss it with your own lawyers and tell them what you heard, and go ahead. But I think it's important that everybody have some basic plan, because without this, unfortunately, things may not turn out the way, you know, you want them to turn out. It's a morbid subject, but unfortunately, something that's gotta be addressed. And all of us have probably seen situations where people didn't do anything and the consequences that happened. Whether it was they lost their house, or they wound up on life support for months and months, or things like that. So, that's it. Well, listen, I thank you all for inviting me here. and-
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, this is great.
Very enlightening.
It really was.
We'll make it a point.
Oh, you wanna name me your trustee yet?
Yeah.
You can name anyone over 18 as your trustee.
Oh, that lets me in.
Oh, you're welcome, you're welcome. I hope it was helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get some honey.
Exactly, what it is, you just have a corporation, it's the same thing. So your house, instead of being in your name, your house is gonna be in the name of Jones Family Trust, or whatever name you wanna give it. It's a different, it's like a corporation, you operate a business, you got a corporation, it's still you control it.
It's still a 5-year thing.
The worst
Yeah,
thing
that's
that
why I
people do
was
is make
surprised.
Oh, we also have